Nearly running into the streets, I tried to compose myself as I met the gaze of multiple people that must have recognized me. All thought of the event or the hunt that preceded it had escaped my mind. Douglas Maverick is no proof that I know, I told myself. I took a quick glance behind me, sweating profusely. Does that even matter? Am I too much of a risk? I mean, I'm suspicious at the very least. Walking towards Jamie's house, I found myself hoping that she wouldn't lock herself in her room again. What am I thinking? I thought, nearly tripping on a rogue rock in the rugged street. She won't understand any of this. Even with the increased amount of soot present, Jamie's face lightened a bit as I greeted her. Can I talk to you about something, Jamie? I asked, part of my brain growing angry with me for even asking. Jamie's face lightened even more as she said, Sure, what is it? For a second, I felt like saying something positive just because Jamie seemed so happy, but I realized that I wouldn't gain anything from doing so. I think Douglas Maverick has reason to suspect that I know about my mom. I said almost too fast to be properly understood. Jamie's eyes widened, and she bit her lip as she said, That's definitely not good news. Yeah, it's not, I said, looking away from Jamie. What are you planning to do? She asked, likely hoping for an answer she knew she wouldn't get. I'm going to keep hunting, I said, with a little more disdain in my voice than I had meant. If I become a valuable enough asset, I doubt they will do anything to me. I almost had to double back when Jamie replied with, Okay, I believe you can make that work. My mouth already slightly opened, I said, Thank you, that means a lot. Beaming at me, she said, You're welcome. I'm happy to help you in any way I can. Lightly pinching the side of her pants, she continued, Do you remember the package you delivered for me in the big storm when we were kids? Only vaguely. I lied, remembering the great sense of pride and accomplishment I had felt after doing so. I was supposed to deliver the package, said Jamie. My mother wanted me to do it because she knew it would rain and that it wouldn't matter much if I had gotten wet rather than her or my sister. Jamie's eyes now drifting towards the floor. I didn't pay enough attention to the clouds, so I had no idea a storm was coming. You owed me a favor, so I had you deliver the package. I don't remember what it was or where you took it, but I do recall that I felt highly annoyed when I realized that it was pouring down rain outside. I figured you would give up on the package and go home, which would mean I would get in trouble. Jamie broke eye contact with me, which she had just barely managed to regain, and stared out a window to her left. Biting her lip once again, she cautiously continued, I found that I was angry with you. You were the reason I would be scolded by my mother. You were going to give up and leave the package out in the streets. Except you didn't even consider doing that. You can imagine my surprise when you returned to this house drenched from head to toe with a note from the recipient of the package that was completely dry. Jamie slightly raised her hands in the air as she said, You'd actually done it. You'd persisted through the raging storm simply because you gave your word. You knew you had to make it work, so you did. Jamie returned her gaze to me, smiling as she said, If you think this is the best way to go, you've got my full support. That night, I thought not of the fame or acceptance I was always searching for, or of the many possible dangers I might soon face. I only thought of how cozy and warm I was under my soft blanket on the extra mattress. My good mood that had lasted throughout the night and into the morning was immediately extinguished as I entered Douglas Maverick's office. The paralyzingly strong smell of citrus nearly caused me to faint. With its sudden arrival, I abruptly began shaking. How am I supposed to keep increasing my fame if Douglas Maverick suspects me? I thought, taking a citrus-filled deep breath that propelled a loud cough out of my mouth. I saw Douglas Maverick sitting on his desk rather than his usual comfortable-looking chair. Felix, I had an idea, said Douglas Maverick, grabbing a map of Tri-City from a drawer. I think you should go get the third piece of the fruitless tree today. Through what appeared to be a forced smile, he said, Ironically enough, the last piece is actually meant to be fruit. That sounds good, I said, willing to take any opportunity to get away from him. Perfect! The sooner we get this thing to the buyer, the better. By the way, the hard part of getting this piece was just finding its location, said Douglas Maverick, letting out a light chuckle. He said, Since that's already taken care of, this should be a walk in the park for you. By the way, the location we thought it was a bit of a red herring, so I'll lend you my own map where it is marked correctly. Smiling up at me, he held out his hand. Taking the map from Douglas Maverick, I said, If that's the case, I think I'll get right on it. Closing the door a little too fast, I began making my way out of the building. At the very least, I would definitely get to strike while the iron was hot when it came to my fame. I was sure everyone would still be talking about me by the time that I had completed the fruitless tree. On my way out, I saw Hunter, and I could have sworn that he had seen me. In any case, he refused to make eye contact with me, which was slightly worrying. Before I opened the door to exit the building, he turned around. Felix, I think I should give you something, he said, finally looking me in the eyes. He handed me a blue pearl-like object that was cold to the touch. Don't squeeze it too hard or it'll shatter. Okay, I replied almost as a question. Finally being able to read a situation, Hunter said, think of it as a good luck charm. Before I could ask more, Hunter was already entering the waiting room. I carefully put the strange object in my bag before leaving the building. My opinion on Hunter was that of extreme confusion. I arrived at the hunt location, which was a couple miles away from the rest of the city. A huge polished stone fence lay around the hunt location. Bright green vines climbed over the fence as if trying to escape whatever lay inside. I was unable to catch any glimpse of the inside until I reached the entrance. Calling it the entrance may not be the best way of describing it, considering that it was just a big, almost triangle-shaped hole in the wall. I used my dagger to slash away some of the many vines growing through the hole. Only then could I see the inside of the walls. A huge garden lay before me. Garden boxes that likely once contained vegetables and other plants were now filled with weeds. Vines almost completely covered the dirt and concrete below. At the center of the garden stood a large tree surrounded by 3 white fountains. At the top of each of the fountains was a great gargoyle spitting out water, except only one of the gargoyles seemed to still be functioning. As I stepped onto the large silver ring that surrounded the fountains, I realized that the vines had not followed. The only living thing in the ring was the tree in the center. I put my hand on the smooth outside of the fountain that was still functioning. When Douglas said this would be a walk in the park, he really meant it, I said out loud. My nose was abruptly pumped full of the smell of citrus. I looked up at the tree to see that it was growing countless neon glowing oranges. Are those the same oranges Douglas is always eating? I thought to myself. If they are, then they can't be part of the fruitless tree, otherwise we could have finished it a long time ago. The tree shifted slightly. The movement caused one of the glowing oranges to fall to the ground below. It splattered, leaving an orange liquid flowing out of it, causing the smell of citrus to be further intensified. I watched as a stream of orange juice flowed into the earth below. Shuddering, I noticed that the water in the fountain had started to slowly turn to ice. A tree branch snapped and fell to the dirt, taking a multitude of glowing oranges with it. I looked up at where it came from and found that every muscle in my body was clenching tight. A pair of pitch black legs appeared from the lowest of the leaves. After some intense shaking, the rest of the creature dropped to the floor, right next to the first squashed orange. The creature was about twice as tall as me, bearing many bright orange-colored cracks. Except there was no tint of citrus coming from them, but rather intense heat. The creature's whole body grew and shrunk every few seconds, like it was breathing through the cracks. Instead of a face, it bore a single vertical slit that was also glowing orange. As I took a step back, the creature seemed to exhale, which caused my eyes to reflexively close due to the extreme heat. As it then inhaled, I felt a shiver rising through my spine. Sneaking backwards, one of the creature's massively long arms were dragged into the pool of water below the fountain. Immediately, steam began to rise as the water that had just been turning to ice rapidly evaporated. Seeing the creature saunter towards me, I wondered, why hadn't Douglas warned me about this? Another shiver flew through my body as the creature inhaled. Did Douglas just not know about this creature? No, he's been here before. How else was he getting those oranges? Considering how many he seems to eat, he probably knows this place like the back of his hand. The creature's slender right arm swung towards me with much more speed than its slow movement would suggest possible. Practically dropping to the ground, I found myself stricken with fear. If Douglas was completely aware of this monster before me, why would he send me here? I thought. Douglas Maverick gave me no warning of what was waiting for me, and there appears to be no real purpose for me being here, since these oranges clearly aren't the final piece of the fruitless tree. I think he has real reason to suspect I might know what he did to my mom. Maybe I'm not meant to come back from this hunt. Despite my recently gained fame, no one would question where I'd gone. It is the unspoken rule of treasure hunting. Douglas Maverick must know that I won't be able to defeat this monster before me. He wouldn't risk me being able to come back knowing he'd tried to kill me. Does that mean it's over? Will I ever see my father or Jamie again? I thought, remembering the short conversation I had had with Jamie the day before. If you think this is the best way to go, you've got my full support, I recalled Jamie saying. Her wide smile projected across my mind. Maybe it wasn't the best way to go after all. The very thing I desperately wanted Jamie to support would now cause my death. Jamie never gave up on me. Even after I made it clear that I would be taking on such a dangerous profession, she supported me. If I ever really needed anything, I was sure that Jamie would have been willing. It just wouldn't be fair to leave her working some terrible job believing that she may have been able to save me if she had just said something different. I scanned the garden, seeing the many vines trying to escape its confines. There was nothing to be gained in the garden, only things to be lost. I turned around and bolted. If Douglas Maverick was confident enough to send me here, I can assume that fighting this monster will likely be my death, I thought, racing across the vines. I don't think Jamie or my father would be able to bear it if I died out here, all alone. Nearly making it to the triangular hole in the wall, I felt my legs be lifted from the ground. My shirt lit on fire as the monster held me up with one dark hand, its slender fingers wrapping all the way around my torso. All the vines the creature had to cross to get to me had been turned to black dust. Squealing in pain as my body was being burned to a crisp, I reached for my leather bag. Successfully retrieving the pearl-like orb, I hurled it into the creature's slit that lay where a face should. Immediately dropping me, the creature inhaled to such an intense degree that all the fire on and around me was instantly extinguished. Seeming to be stunned, the creature breathed much more intensely at a much faster rate. Taking the opportunity, I jumped through the hole in the wall and darted through the forest outside. Every tree I passed, I knew it was a little bit further from death, the bright green leaves swaying in the wind. I thought of Hunter and how he may have saved my life. I wasn't sure how to feel about him as a whole, but at least in the moment, I was quite grateful. Thanks to him, I would be able to see Jamie and my father again, and that was something I wouldn't soon forget. For some time, I couldn't get the thick scent of hot smoke out of my nostrils. However, as I flew through the forest, the floral aromas of the leaves above me eventually overtook it. As I ran, I refused to slow down for anything. My body begged for rest, but I did not oblige. I was no longer running to escape the creature, but rather to see my father. I'd gone off course so I wouldn't arrive in Redtown. I had left my father in a terrible state. A strong tinge of guilt crept through my body, fighting for my attention with that of the extreme exhaustion. For all he knew, I could have been killed in an unlimited amount of ways. It wasn't right to leave him there, with only the cat for comfort. While I still wasn't happy about him trying to force me into lumber, I knew that he only did it because he cared. I practically fell into the clearing around my father's cabin. My legs shaking, I knocked on the thin wood door. The door opened a crack, so I couldn't see what was beyond it. My ears caught a quiet sob coming from the inside of the cabin. Preparing to reach for my dagger, I eased up when the door fully opened. Tears dripped down my father's face as he sprung towards me, his arms trapping me in a massive bear hug. "I'm sorry, Felix," said my father, letting out another sob. I just wanted you to be safe." "I know, Dad," I replied, no longer resisting the embrace. My father let go of me and immediately rushed back to the cabin. "I haven't been able to keep up with the amount of eggs the chickens have made," said my father, clearly implying that he was going to force them down my throat whether I liked it or not. Seeing me fumble into my chair, he asked, "Are you all right? If there's anything wrong at all." "I'm okay," I replied, taking a deep breath. "Just tired from running." My father was so happy at the thought of me wanting to get home so badly that he didn't even try to find out if I had been running for some other reason. "It's getting late. If you're so tired that you can barely sit down, I think you should go to bed soon," said my father, very matter-of-factly. "That sounds great," I said, deciding I would go to sleep right after I was force-fed an unknown quantity of eggs. My father laughed heartily as I struggled to stand up, not because I was exhausted, but because it felt like I was going to explode, greasy egg yolks launching every direction. His face growing somber, he asked, "How long will you be staying?" With the knowledge that I couldn't go back to treasure hunting, I begrudgingly told him I would be staying for a long time. I felt angry, not because I had nearly been killed, but because my opportunity to become famous had been ripped from me. I looked back at my father, who was smiling wide as he picked up Fred from his weird cat neck flab. Maybe I can still find some kind of happiness here, I thought to myself, observing the room around me. Almost every item I could see was fashioned from wood by my father. The walls of stacked logs piled on top of each other surrounded me, creating a log cabin that my father had injected his heart and soul into. He made it for me and my mother, so we could live far away from the evils that Redtown prospered off of. The place truly did feel safe. Now, get off to bed. I'm sure that sleep helps digestion or something, said my father, grabbing a jacket from a frail wooden coat hanger. I'm going to finish some work outside, then watch the sunset. Nodding, I replied, I'll see you tomorrow, Dad. My eyes still closed tight, I awoke to a foul stench. I thought that maybe my father had burned some meat he had been cooking. He's more determined to get me to increase my protein intake than I have been determined to get famous, I thought to myself, the tips of my lips curling. Maybe I can get away with not eating whatever it is if it's burnt. I stepped into the kitchen where I found nothing to be out of the ordinary. Many dirty pots and pans lying in the sink below a wall covered in photographs of me and my mother, all in brightly painted wooden frames. However, the smell had only gotten stronger. The overpowering scent of burnt meat pierced my nostrils. I found that there was nothing to note about my father's bedroom either. His bed covered in cat hair, I realized that I hadn't seen Fred either. That cat always seemed to follow me around when my father wasn't caring for him, so it was rather out of the ordinary for him to be completely absent. Maybe my father's outside with Fred and they were cooking some meat that they burned really badly? I thought to myself, not acknowledging the fact that I couldn't remember my father ever not cooking a meal to perfection. I maneuvered to the front door and opened it to find that the scent became overpowering outside. The familiar smell of the forest was completely gone, despite the forest itself being right in front of me. My eyelids formed slits as I observed the woods. Though it seemed mostly normal, a few of the scattered oak trees' leaves were blackened and turned to ash. Many of the weeds scattered through the clearing around the cabin had completely disappeared. I closed my eyes as hard as I could and turned to the left. Wishing I could just go back to sleep, I forced my eyelids open to see a sight that would be ingrained in my memory for the rest of my life. A large black chunk of something was laid on the dirt, small gray clouds of smoke rising from it. Another much smaller chunk of black material still had a very light trace of flame coming off of it that went out just as I started to look away. Resisting the temptation to fall to my knees, I walked to the left side of the cabin, making sure not to look too closely at the large black chunk as I went. The chicken coop, made completely of wood, appeared at first to be untouched. However, the chickens that previously inhabited the coop had become nothing more than a dozen or so black chunks of ash scattered about randomly. The loud cooing of hungry birds that was once so prominent had left nothing but the sounds of the forest in its absence. A sob that I had failed to suppress escaped my throat and echoed through the trees. As I took a deep breath, it felt like the world had gone cold. All life that was once happy now had to forever bear the freezing temperatures that were forced upon it. As I sharply exhaled, I felt as if the world had transformed into a burning hell where everyone only cared for themselves. If a terrible act of cruelty would make one's life more convenient, it would be taken without a second thought. All my father had ever done was try to protect me. All he had ever wanted was my safety. His continued involvement in my life may have technically saved me, but it cost him. His desperate efforts had gone unnoticed by me, because it wasn't what I wanted. My desperation to get what I specifically wanted had caused unforeseen amounts of pain to not just my father, but for Jamie and the cabin's animals too. Fred the cat and the chickens had nothing to do with any of this. Even if they could sense something was wrong, there was no way for them to realize the extent of the danger that I had personally put them in. While Jamie may have been still alive, I had no way of knowing what I had put her through. She invested her time and energy to help me however she could, despite her disapproval of my actions. She and my father had likely been worrying for my safety whenever I was basking in the glory of almost but not quite getting myself killed. I excruciatingly walked back to the large chunk of black material. Forcing myself to look at it, I was sure that my father's life had ended in utter terror. I wouldn't doubt it if all he could think of while being turned to charcoal was that I might be in danger. The stream of tears flowing down my face turned into a rushing river. I thought of what he had said about the wood and the forest being able to protect me. Did he somehow know I was safe? I questioned. I knew that my father did not fear death or extreme pain, but rather that I might come across either of those things. I did come across death, but it wasn't my own. This wasn't even the first time. Barely a thought had entered my mind when Ryan died. I was so focused on my own pain and suffering that I failed to realize his. How many people were devastated by his death? A better but more depressing question would be, how many people even knew he died. It's not like there was any publicity around it. Not many people knew who Ryan was, so practically no one noticed his absence. Even hunters that were well known had disappeared over the years with no real explanation about what happened to them. It was always, they've retired or they've gone to live it up in Shimmer City. At that moment, I was sure that those were all lies. Douglas Maverick knew it would only hurt business to reveal that people were losing their lives for it. I looked at my father and was barely able to make out his face. Amazingly, he appeared to be smiling. He must have known that the monster turning him into a chunk of crisp black flesh would not do the same to me. The cabin, that quite frankly was so flammable, had gone untouched as the monster rampaged. While the thought that my father had been happy as he was killed did slow the rush of tears trenching my face, I knew it still wasn't right. It was finally his turn to be happy, to get what he wanted. I knew that he was right, that it would be best for me to give up on treasure hunting. He had chosen the right side, and yet he still lost. Not because he had chosen the right side, but because I'd chosen the wrong one. Though I was furious with myself, I decided it would be better to do something productive rather than cry about the consequences of my actions finally getting to me. I decided that Douglas Maverick had to die. No one would have a sudden change of heart after getting as far as Douglas Maverick had. The time for that had long passed. I was sure that he had ruined the lives of many like myself, and would continue without thought if given the chance. I chuckled to myself, my face still moist from the many salty tears. He didn't even pay me anything yet. My lips curled downward. That's all right. He won't have to. I came across an unusually small number of people as I journeyed through Redtown. Out of those few that I did see, none recognized me, which for once I was grateful for. As I neared the office, I observed the absolute spectacle that was the high-class treasure hunting neighborhood. Reserved only for the best, the neighborhood appeared nearly empty. Though I had once hoped to join those in the neighborhood, I found that there weren't many people to be joined. The massive houses that lined the street gave the impression that they had no occupants. There was no one left to be housed. Joining those in the neighborhood was a distant goal for all treasure hunters that almost none would actually achieve. The key word being almost none. A few houses down the street, a particularly fancy yet battered front door swung open, revealing a massive bald man sporting a black jacket who happened to be missing his left arm. I darted out of sight, attempting to get to the office as soon as possible. As far as anyone knows, I'm supposed to be dead, I told myself, the building coming into view, its many shining windows and walls failing to reflect the corruption within. Entering the waiting room, my eyes met with Hunter's for only a moment. He was coming out of the library, but right as he saw me, he stepped back inside and slammed the metal door in front of him. At the very least, he won't warn Douglas Maverick, I thought to myself. The door to the office seemed to rise taller above me than it ever had before. The plaque engraved in the door proclaiming Douglas Maverick seemed to be screaming for me to leave. Whether that was for my own good or not, I didn't care. As I opened the door, the stench hit me instantly. No smell had ever been as strong as the citrus that engulfed my nose at that precise moment. My vision became tainted orange, forcing me to take a step back. Desperately trying to breathe in some normal air, I found that Douglas Maverick was already bounding towards me, holding a dagger with a glowing orange blade. Clenching the hilt of my dagger, I plunged it towards him, only finding citrus-filled air in his place. I jumped out of the way of a slash coming from my side, the orange blade cutting my shirt. Douglas Maverick's face completely expressionless as he swung at me again, cutting another strip in my shirt. Our knives produced a loud clanging sound as they made contact. Neon orange sparks flew in every direction, emanating from his kitchen knife-shaped blade. The few that landed on me stung greatly for no more than a second. Jumping out of the way of another slash, I managed to extend my blade to reach and pierce Douglas Maverick's skin. It was only a small cut, but it showed he was definitely defeatable. Flying towards me, Douglas Maverick swung 3 times in rapid succession. Due to a quick duck, only the first blow landed. Similarly to the wound I had just caused, I had only gained a small cut. However, the skin around the cut began rapidly turning orange and falling off. Fortunately, it didn't continue for long, but the unusually large amount of pain that it caused made me lose my focus. Barely deflecting the next attack, my dagger flew out of my right hand, shrinking back to its normal size as it clattered on the floor behind me. Douglas Maverick immediately made to plunge his blade into my throat with as much power as he could muster. However, he found that his forehead had come in contact with a chunk of metal, speedily going in the opposite direction as him. Seeing Douglas Maverick step backwards, I heard a loud crack coming from his skull. Blood spattered across the inside of his circular red glasses, transforming their hue from a light scarlet to a dark maroon. Finally showing some emotion, he glared at Hunter, who was clutching a large metal mallet, the couple beads of blood dripping from it. He darted for Hunter as I ran for my dagger. Turning around my glistening blue blade in hand, I made out Hunter's mangled body lying on the hard floor. Douglas Maverick, jumping off of him, made a dash towards me, but he had definitely lost some of his speed. Jumping past him, I managed to rip open the side of his stomach. Entire body shaking, Douglas Maverick managed to keep an unbelievable straight face. He lurched towards me, now holding his dagger with both hands. He made to pierce my heart, but only put a hole in the wall, causing a clatter of falling objects in his office. His head turned slowly towards me, his mouth flatter than I had ever seen it before. Right where he'd been struck with the mallet, my dagger's tip entered his skull. His bright orange tie jumped forward as if trying to escape before falling back onto his chest. For what felt like an eternity, Douglas Maverick stared into my eyes. My dagger had not only gone through his skull, but the entire, now bright red wall behind him. Still holding my gaze, his head slowly fell a few inches forward, causing his glasses to drop to the floor, where their lenses instantly shattered into a million pieces. Each individual shard vibrated rapidly for only a second before their bright red hue faded to colorless transparency. It was only when I looked back did I realize that the rest of his body had gone completely limp. Even after my blade had shrunken back to its original size and he had fallen to the floor, his eyes did not close. His stern, expressionless face did not shift, even after slamming into the hard tiles, spewing blood in every direction. Douglas Maverick's top hat rolled across the floor like a coin on its side. It soon came into contact with the wall and fell upside down. The room grew cold as I realized what I had done. I thought of all those that never got this far. They all either submitted to the treasure-hunting ways or died trying. A soft wheeze, followed by a softer chuckle, came from behind me. "Felix," pleaded Hunter, a thick line of red escaping his mouth and flowing onto his stained suit. He sat up against the wall where he usually stood. "When I was 9, my friend told me to hurt someone," whispered Hunter, before being interrupted by an intense cough. "I thought it was okay, because it would be my friend's fault." The countless stab wounds enveloping Hunter's body bled out rapidly. "He was the one with bad intentions. I was just trying to keep my friends." Skin shifting to orange, it began shedding. Attempting to suppress a groan, Hunter continued. "I lightly punched the kid a couple of times, got in trouble, and was successfully able to blame my friend." "I've never considered myself to be much of a religious man, Felix," said Hunter, blood gushing out of a particularly large wound. "But I can pray that my sins have been forgiven." Hunter let go of the bloody mallet that he had been clenching so tightly. Piles of bright orange skin lay on the floor, much of it drenched in more blood. After exchanging a pained look with me, he lightly smiled before going limp. My head down, I left the building. Clenching the orange cut in my side, I sniffed the vague scent of citrus pulsating from it. A sick feeling in my stomach grew as my head began to ache. Jamie gasped as I fell in front of her, barely catching myself before I hit the wood floor. "Felix, what happened?" cried Jamie, running to my side. Resisting the urge to say that I was just fine, I told her, "It's all over, Jamie." I laid my left hand on my forehead, surprised not to find it soaked in blood. "Everything I had was ripped from my life, and in a way it was my fault. I only did what I did to protect anyone like me in the future." "You're wrong," said Jamie, straightening her back and lifting her head slightly. "How could you have lost everything when you still have me?" A small grin formed on my face as I replied, "I guess it would be pretty hard to lose you, considering how persistent you are." "Look at yourself, Felix," she said, poking me in the chest. "Once you decided you wanted to become a treasure hunter, there was nothing anyone could do to stop you. It seemed like you would either make it to the top or spend the rest of your life trying." A familiar smirk that I recognized from my childhood was plastered on her lips. "Well, look how that turned out," I said a bit rudely, wishing I could take it back. I heard Jamie reply, "It doesn't matter where you ended up as long as you can do it again. If you could just let go of treasure hunting and put the same effort into something else, you could do anything." said Jamie as she began digging through a cupboard in the wall. Jamie, that might actually be the cheesiest thing you've ever said, I replied. So what? It's true, she said, letting out a vocal sound of triumph. Striding back to me with some kind of bandage in her hand, she continued, So, are you gonna tell me what happened today or not? I begrudgingly explained the events leading up to my father's death and how I had to kill Douglas Maverick. Barely commenting on any of it, Jamie had an expression of loving concern on her face almost the whole time. Almost as if she hadn't heard any of the story, she said, You can stay here as long as you'd like. I assume you might need to hide for a while anyway. I almost agreed on the spot, but quickly interjected as a sharp tinge of guilt shot up my spine. Hey, are you okay? I asked, gesturing towards the soot on Jamie's face. Her hands twitching suddenly, she replied, Oh, it's alright, really. I'm just trying to earn some extra cash. Shifting to the right, I bit my lip before saying, I just think it puts you in a bad state. Before she could reply, a most definitely real tinge of pain shot up my spine, causing me to lose balance for a moment. It's not a good time to be worrying about anything but yourself, said Jamie in a highly matter-of-factly tone. You can try to repay me through advice or something once we know you're not in a possibly lethal situation. Letting out a light chuckle, I nodded and paced towards a nearby sofa. Sitting down, I found that the pain wasn't too strong as long as I didn't focus on it. That night, Jamie made what was likely the best bacon I had ever had. The rich texture allowed me to forget the events of the day. At least for a while, which, of course, made the pain even more bearable. Though I did think of Hunter, it was not with disdain. I believed that he had changed before his death. He could have easily waited while I fought Douglas Maverick. He could have easily not given me the pearl-like orb before my last hunt. He could have easily blamed someone else for what he did to my mother. But he didn't. That night, I decided that I held no grudge against him. He died the best version of himself. 3 days later, I asked Jamie about one of the somewhat blurry pictures on the wall. Why aren't you in any of the pictures here? Jamie looked at the picture where her sister and her parents could be seen all smiling at the camera before replying. Once my parents realized that my sister had great potential for some kind of job in Shimmer City, they focused all their time and energy on her. They had her take special classes and just generally do anything extra as she possibly could in school. Jamie's gaze drifted to another picture that contained only her sister. I don't blame her for it. It's not her fault our parents became so attached to the idea of her getting this big shot job. So, what happened? Where are they all? I asked. There was a pained expression on Jamie's face as she replied, Once they saved up enough money, they bought a tiny apartment in Shimmer City. My father said he would write back to me about all the progress my sister was going to make. Though I was far from happy about being left completely alone in poverty, he assured me that once there was enough money, I could go with them. Nowadays, I'm glad I didn't ever get to go. Jamie seated herself next to me on the tattered sofa I was on as she let out a long sigh. I waited in silence for Jamie to continue, now very invested in her story. Jamie looked towards the front door in the other room. I got a letter about a year after they left, she said, as if this was the first time she had thought about the event since it happened. Apparently, my sister gave way under the pressure. Making one of the first real choices in her life, she decided she didn't want to chase that big shot job anymore. The letter quickly explained that my sister and our parents had all had to take up low-paying, hard labor jobs just to make ends meet. The back of Jamie's head sank into the cushion behind her. I just couldn't believe that she gave up like that. I could tell that she legitimately wanted that job, even if our parents were forcing it on her. I sat up slightly. Maybe it seemed like the easiest thing to do at the moment. I'm sure expectations like that would be the worst. If you're just working labor, no one expects you to do great things, so you don't have to. I turned towards Jamie. I can't imagine that she doesn't regret her choice. Jamie's head sank further into the cushion behind her as she said, I thought I should help them. After a moment of silence, she realized I wasn't going to interrupt with any questions. Since I've been living in this house and I'm only alive because they raised me, it just seemed like I owed them. So I took up this job at a nearby factory so I could start earning money to get them back here. I figured that within 10 or so years I'd have enough. I fought back a voice crack as I interjected. That work will kill you by then. Not to mention that your parents abandoned you. I know that you don't want to do the same to them, but I swear that the regret you will feel will be a lot better than dying before you can even hope of saving them. Jamie looked at me and bit her lip. Felix, do you regret becoming a treasure hunter? I opened my mouth as if to answer, but nothing came out. I'm not sure. I learned a lot from it, but I also caused a lot of pain because of it, I said, observing Jamie start to peel an orange. Some of the pain has stayed with me. Yesterday, I almost went outside when you left to go to the market. I wanted to see if anyone would recognize me. I didn't even consider that would be a bad thing. I found that my fists were clenched, but it was too late to stop the tangent when it meant so much to me. I just wanted to see if anyone still knew who I was. Not knowing is killing me. Biting down hard with her teeth, Jamie replied, I know who you are and I care about you. Why can't that be enough? Do you really think any fan would just up and put their life on the line for you? Jamie stood up, but she averted her gaze from me. Felix, they're looking for you. The treasure hunters. As far as they know, all you did was make it harder for them to get their fame. Fame is what they live for. It's the only thing they care about, and you took it from them. You stole the eggs from the crocodile nest, and you still think it's safe to swim in the river. The orange Jamie had been peeling was now squashed in her palm, the citrus juices flowing through the cracks in her fist. I braced for more as Jamie's mouth opened wide, but I heard nothing. What was left of the orange in her hands landed on the wood plank floor, squirting its juices in all directions. I'm sorry, I replied, now speaking to her back. Look, if I can manage to really just forget about fame altogether, will you quit that stupid job? I know you want to help everyone, but usually we don't deserve it. Shaking, Jamie shifted closer to me. Sort of reaching out as if to fill as much space as possible, I maneuvered my head to see what she was looking at, slightly angry that she didn't appear to be listening. Felix, no, she whispered aggressively. Her words came far too late, as I had already locked eyes with the spiker who was staring at me through the window. The spiker stepped back from the window, giving me visibility of more of his battered body. Eyes open wide, he fiercely dashed forward, his loudly whirring mechanical arm smashing open the wall like a cracker. Ignoring Jamie's screams, he continued at full speed towards us. Grabbing Jamie's arm and jumping out of the way, we barely managed to avoid getting turned into crushed jelly. My dagger's in the leather bag on the table, I told Jamie, sounding as calm as possible. The spiker turned around after puncturing a large dent into the wall on the other side of the one he destroyed. The sofa I had just been sitting on was now a bunch of shattered wood pieces and shredded pillows. Feathers from the pillows drifting to the floor, the spiker made to charge once again. This time he reached out his real arm just as I tried to jump out of the way, barely catching me. Puke launched out of my mouth as I slammed into the picture-covered wall. I was able to get up with the help of a particularly large picture with a heavy frame that fell right on top of the spiker's head. Snapping out of his daze, the spiker attempted to stand up, but was thwarted by Jamie shoving my dagger into his shoulder, tears running down her face as she did so. Terrified at the sight of the blood now shooting towards her like a massive geyser, she ran to the spiker's other shoulder, where she shoved the dagger into the glowing red gem. As it flew out of its hole, the arm began making high-pitched shrieking noises that were almost in sync with the spiker's screams of pain. As the spiker turned towards Jamie, I caught the dagger which she had just tossed. Once again averting his attention, the spiker yelled out incomprehensible nonsense. As a mental breakdown took control of him, I stood paralyzed. The spiker rapidly began punching holes in the wall that caused even more pictures to fall from it. The pipe on his mechanical arm next to where the red gem used to be had begun filling the room with suffocating black smoke. Said smoke grew thinner as the arm's constant screeching finally stopped. Hearing Jamie coughing somewhere nearby, I could finally make out the spiker again. Though his arm was now silent, he had only grown louder. I gasped as I saw that his arm had begun melting, the now molten metal seeping into the spiker's flesh. I stepped back and shut my eyes. The spiker's wailing continued, but I was able to regain some composure. That was something he most definitely didn't have at the moment. Taking a deep breath, I faintly sniffed citrus entering my nostrils. Not the citrus from the squashed orange on the floor, but from somewhere else. Raising my dagger, I found that it was what had produced the wretched smell. The difference between it and the smell from the orange on the floor was that it seemed unnatural. The scent of citrus is a particularly strong one that tends to hang around much longer than most. I became so sick of its almost but not quite sweet flavor that my stomach tried to throw up. Unfortunately, I had already done that just seconds ago, so my gaping open mouth produced nothing. I stepped forward, but the spiker did not take any notice. Pounding his remaining fist, now holding the red gem against a bookshelf, he produced a distorted scream. Dust from the ceiling drifted around the room, obscuring the spiker just enough to hide his tears. "I know what you did," wailed the spiker. "I was happy. Hunting was the only thing I've ever loved, and you took it from me. My reputation is nothing without Douglas." The image of the short, smiling woman bearing long brown hair flashed before my eyes. "You loved much more than treasure hunting, but I think you destroyed that yourself," I said, sprinting forward. Just as the spiker turned back towards me, he found that my dagger had ripped right through his black jacket and out the other side. Hesitating for only a moment, his right hand crushed the gem that had once powered his mechanical arm. He took an unnaturally deep breath before his right arm flashed a neon red color. He grasped my blade and attempted to break it in half. Though his hand was sliced deep in both the palm and the fingers, eventually it snapped. A deafening noise like the scream of a dying animal rang out through the room, the dagger now vibrating in my hands. The side of the blade that was pinning the spiker to the bookshelf shrank into nothingness, while the other reduced its size until it was about half as large as the whole knife usually had been. As the spiker coughed up bright red blood directly into my face, I thrusted what was left of my dagger towards him. The broken end, reminiscent of a shattered bottle, entered the left of his chest, forcing him backwards, a great thumping sound echoing through the house. A gruff but quickly spoken voice, just loud enough to understand, caught my attention. "Please, tell someone about me. I've done too much to be forgotten. Just tell anyone. I just need..." An explosion of coughing left the spiker's mouth. Much of the blood that escaped fell right back onto him. "I just need to see someone smile at my stories again." The spiker looked at me hopefully, as if expecting a legitimate answer, paying no notice to his grievous injuries or the stream of blood flowing out of the hole in his cheek. "We need to go," I said to Jamie as she approached me in my peripheral vision. Though my eyes couldn't seem to break away from the spiker, I held up the dagger to my nose, my nostrils once again processing the almost artificial scent of citrus. It's very difficult to get rid of the smell by force. If you pay attention to it, it'll never leave. You can wash your hands with as much soap as you like, but as long as you bring them to your nose, the citrus will still be there. It only leaves when you forget that it was ever there to begin with. When you stop looking for the thing you so wish to rid yourself of. I tossed the dagger in between me and the spiker, who I realized was already dead. He smelled the citrus until his very last breath, but I doubt he would even recognize the taste of the fruit it came from. The cabin had grown moist from the rain that had been pouring down the last couple of days. It had started nearly immediately after Jamie and I had arrived. The constant pattering on the blurry windows made me almost not notice Jamie's quiet humming. Standing in front of one of the relatively clear windows, she stared dreamily at the forest outside. Her head swayed slowly from side to side as her quiet song continued. The couch I was resting on creaked as I sat up. Straining to hear Jamie's low drone, I recognized the song. I was surprised to discover a tear drifting down my cheek. The song was about a shining gem lost in a pile of rugged stone. The pile was turned into a house that quickly collapsed. Left in the rubble, the gem was never seen for what it was. The rain slowed as Jamie's mere humming turned to song. I closed my eyes and laid back on the couch, now able to hear Jamie's singing without straining my ears. I combed my memory for where I had heard the song, but I found nothing. I knew every word by heart, and yet I had no clue where they came from. I began to hum alongside Jamie's soft voice, causing her shoulders to perk up for a moment. As the rain began to come down hard again, she made sure to sing loud enough for me to hear. I reached under my shirt and felt the wound inflicted by the blade of Douglas Maverick. I knew it still had much healing to do, but at least there was no stinge of pain when my hand skimmed over the smooth bandage wrapped around my body. Jamie gave up on her family like I had hoped, but I could tell she felt guilty about it. Sometimes she would cry to herself when I brought it up, but I knew not to try and stop her. I knew that one day she would realize that as noble a goal as it was, she never would have achieved it. It would have been nothing but a distant hope fueled by her quickly diminishing well-being. When the song was finished, Jamie turned to me, beaming as she did so. Her smile had much more impact on me than those of the crowds of fans ever did. Their fleeting glimpses of happiness meant very little when compared to the utter joy Jamie was displaying. Despite all the horrible things I told myself I had caused, She still managed to make that smile of hers whenever I felt I had done something wrong. She always knew I wouldn't stop until I made it right. And with her help, that was true. Many of the treasure hunters that remained never found any kind of peace. I may have killed the dealer, but the trade continued. As red as ever, the town's treasure hunting market will drone on until the artifact supply is completely exhausted. That is when it will end. There is nothing I can do to stop it until then. The walls that hold up the ceiling above the treasure hunters' heads are made of moldy bread, and unfortunately for said treasure hunters, they possess an insatiable hunger. As Jamie plopped down onto the couch next to me, her beaming smile still wide, she took my hand and started to sing a new song. One I knew I hadn't ever heard before. Though I still wouldn't recognize the song, I can easily recall the warm feeling in my gut that I had never gotten from treasure hunting or fame. The kind of feeling that cannot be given to you by people that don't love you for who you are, no matter how many of them there are. The kind of feeling that can only be achieved when you have something or someone real. In my case, someone that could let me forget the pain I had both caused and suffered, so I could once again be happy to be alive.